In our MPEG-H authoring plugin, we see all the elements of the Pro Tools session already correspond to one of these so-called components. One very important thing here is the routing window. It lets us see all inputs of the plugin and where the signals are currently routed. We see that the first 10 channels are routed to the 5.1+4 ambience bed and which speakers these signals correspond to. Components that do not have speaker positions next to the input channel are audio objects. The position of these signals is not determined by a speaker position, but dynamically rendered according to the audio metadata. First, I'll revert the plugin to factory default so we can start from scratch. Our session is a production in 5.1+4, so I will select this as a reference layout. Let's start with a channel-based component. By default, it brings up a mono-channel-based component, but of course we can choose 5.1+4, so let's do that. Now, you see here that the channel layout has changed, and the signals are also routed to the corresponding channels of the component. Let's give it a name. This given name will show up on an end-user device, so let's make sure to give it a reasonable name, such as 5.1+4 ambience. The indicator color is purely cosmetic, and it makes sense to align them to what you have in your Pro Tools session. The content kind in this case would be bed mixed, and we can see that there are a couple of different selections to choose from. Since it's our ambience, this does not have any content language, so we'll stick with unknown. For a bed, we don't usually enable interactivity settings. Up next in our routing order is the music stereo track. We will add another channel-based component, set it to stereo, music, and give it a nice color. Maybe later somebody doesn't like the saxophone that much, so let's allow to turn it down by 10 dB. Or somebody might love this saxophone, so let's add +3 dB interactivity range here. The range we set here would later be available on a user interface, for example a TV set or smartphone. Next are our voiceover channels. We have two of them, an English and a German voiceover. Let's have them as individual audio objects, first one English, second one German, and we will also select the content language to match this. If we hit playback now, we wouldn't hear anything. There are still errors because we have not created a preset yet. Let's do that real quick. I'm going to Presets, Create a Preset. A preset is a combination of components and determines which components are played back at the same time. It also gives a couple of extra options in terms of gain offsets and position offsets. We will just add in all the components in our scene. Now let's take a listen.
The cherry blossom. In Japan, it is a symbol of beauty, awakening.
Of course, now that we have added both voiceover objects to the default preset, they would play back at the same time. But what we actually want is that both languages are contained in the default preset, but only one of them is played back. So let's remove them from the preset and add what we call a switch group. A switch group lets us assign multiple components to it and make sure that only one of them is played back. It will also create a selection for the end user on their device to manually switch between the members of the switch group. Now, if we go back and add a switch group instead of the individual languages, we hear only one component being played back. And here, on the monitoring page,
In Japan,
we can select
it is a
which
symbol
one.
of beauty, awakening, Vergänglichkeit.
It's also possible to create object automation with our MPEG-H authoring plugin. You just create a new object component, and you see now that the object automation routing button is active. Over here, we see that the position of the Foley object is determined by the automation lanes, azimuth 1 and elevation 1. For a new automation, just activate right and move your object to the panning window. And as a little sneak preview, there's already some automation in our Pro Tools session.